The mountain town of Pine Ridge sat quiet in the early winter mornings, a place where the air smelled of pine and wood smoke, and the sound of boots crunching snow echoed down empty streets. Ethan Walker lived at the edge of town in a cabin that was small but steady, built from hand-cut logs and patched over the years with his own work. At 38, he carried himself with the quiet strength of a man who had endured loss and chosen to live simply rather than chase anything more. The garage where he worked smelled of oil and metal, and his hands were always marked by grease, but he never minded. Each day he fixed broken engines and bent axles, and each night he returned to Chloe, his 8-year-old daughter, who was his reason for getting up every morning. She brought light into his modest world, her drawings taped to the refrigerator, her laughter bouncing through the cabin, gave warmth to a home that might otherwise have felt too silent. Ethan had once lived a different life. Years earlier, he had been a rescue specialist, the kind of man who ran toward disaster when others ran away. That part of him never fully left, but in Pine Ridge he buried it under routine, focusing on raising his daughter with steadiness and love. He was known in town as the mechanic who could fix anything. But those who looked closer saw a man who kept his heart guarded, who carried pain that time alone could not erase, far away, on the opposite end of the country. Victoria Hayes moved through a world of glass towers and boardrooms. At 36, she was the CEO of a real estate empire in San Francisco, a figure of sharp suits and decisive words. Every morning, her driver picked her up at 7:30 sharp, and every evening, she returned to a penthouse that overlooked the bay, its windows framing the city lights like jewels. From the outside, she appeared untouchable, the kind of woman others admired but did not dare approach. Behind the perfect image was a woman scarred by betrayal. A marriage that had collapsed under the weight of lies left her wary of trust. Success filled her bank accounts, but not her heart, and the silence of her home reminded her each night that power could not erase loneliness. Ethan's world was warm, though humble, bound by father and daughter. Victoria's was cold, though glittering, shaped by ambition and solitude. They lived in different universes, yet both carried wounds hidden beneath their daily routines. Neither of them knew that soon the mountains would bring their lives together, that storm and chance would pull one into the path of the other, setting in motion a story that would test everything they thought they knew about loss, courage, and love. The storm came down hard on the mountain pass, sheets of rain pounding the pavement as Victoria Hayes tightened her grip on the wheel of her black SUV. The wipers fought to keep the windshield clear, but the world outside blurred into streaks of gray. The clock on the dash glowed 09:15 at night, and she told herself she only had a few more miles before the road leveled out. Her phone had no signal. The radio hissed static, and the silence between thunderclaps pressed in on her. She was used to control, to knowing her schedule, to commanding boardrooms where every word mattered. Up here, she was just a woman alone on a twisting Colorado road with no one to call if something went wrong. It happened without warning. The ground shuddered, a deep rumble rolling through the night like the growl of something ancient. Headlights flashed against falling rock. Then the hillside itself seemed to collapse. Victoria had only enough time to gasp before a wave of mud and stone slammed into the SUV. The world turned violent and crushing. Metal screamed as the frame bent. Glass shattered. Cold water poured through cracks. Her seatbelt dug into her chest as the vehicle jolted sideways and came to rest, pinned under debris. She tried the door, but it was jammed. Her breaths came sharp and shallow. Panic surged as she realized she might not make it out. A few miles back, Ethan Walker guided his old pickup through the storm, tired after a late parts delivery. He planned to swing by the neighbor's place and collect Chloe before bedtime. At first, the rumble ahead made him think of thunder, But then his headlights picked up the broken outline of rock and mud across the road. He slowed, heart hammering as he spotted the faint glow of headlights half buried in the slide. Every instinct told him to keep driving, to protect himself, to get back to his daughter. But his hands were already gripping the door handle before the thought fully formed. Some part of him that never died. The part trained to run into danger, pushed him forward. Rain soaked him as he sprinted to the truck bed, pulling out the crowbar and coiled winch cable. His boots sank in mud as he scrambled toward the wreck. A muffled sound cut through the storm. Faint, but unmistakable. A voice calling for help. He dropped to his knees, peering through shattered glass. Victoria's face, pale and bloodied, stared back at him, her leg pinned beneath the collapsed dashboard. He shouted over the rain, urging her to stay calm. She nodded weakly, eyes locked on his. Ethan jammed the crowbar into the bent frame, muscles straining as metal groaned. The storm raged around him, mud sliding closer to engulf the SUV. With a shriek of torn steel, the door gave way. He reached inside, bracing her against his shoulder, dragging her free as pain ripped a cry from her throat. Together they stumbled through the mud. And seconds later the ground behind them gave an awful roar. The SUV disappeared under the shifting landslide, swallowed whole as if it had never been there. On the roadside, gasping and soaked, Ethan eased her down. He pushed wet hair back from her forehead to check her wound. That was when she saw it, the jagged scar running the length of his arm, exposed under his soaked sleeve. Her eyes widened, recognition flickering, something stirring deep and sharp. She opened her mouth, then closed it, saying nothing. Ethan looked at her with steady calm, unaware that his past had just returned in her silence. The storm still howled, but in that instant, another storm began to form, one that neither of them could yet name. Ethan carried Victoria into the cabin, his boots leaving wet tracks across the worn wooden floor. The storm still howled outside, but inside the air was warm, filled with the glow of a small fire that crackled in the stone hearth. The space was modest, patched and lived in, with handmade shelves and a table scarred from years of use. To Victoria, it felt foreign. She was used to glass walls and polished marble, not rough logs and the smell of pine. Yet there was a comfort here, something steady in the way the firelight softened the room. Chloe appeared from the hallway, eyes wide, clutching the stuffed rabbit she never slept without. Ethan's voice was calm as he told her they had someone who needed help. Without hesitation, she set the rabbit aside and hurried to fetch towels and the small first aid kit from the bathroom. She moved with quiet purpose, a child used to responsibility, and Victoria noticed it with a mix of surprise and admiration. Ethan lowered Victoria onto the couch and knelt beside her. His hands were firm but gentle as he cleaned the blood from her temple. When he threaded a needle and stitched the gash above her brow with precision, she blinked through the haze of pain, startled that a mechanic could handle a wound like a seasoned medic. He splinted her injured leg using strips of wood and cloth, improvising with steady focus. There was no hesitation in his movements, no wasted motion. His face remained calm even when her breath caught in pain. For a moment their eyes met. She saw something there, not just skill but history, as if each movement was muscle memory from another life. She wanted to ask, to break the silence with questions, but his attention was fixed on her injuries, not on explanations. He avoided her gaze after that entr'acte, pulling a blanket over her shoulders and checking the fire before stepping back. Chloe returned with more supplies, watching closely, learning from the way her father worked. When the room settled into quiet, she lingered at the edge of the firelight, her small face thoughtful as she looked from her father to Victoria. She sensed something had shifted, though she could not yet name it. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, there was a fragile stillness, the first threads of connection weaving between a woman used to power and a man who lived in silence. The storm did not let up the next day, and neither did the roadblocks of mud and rock that cut off the mountain pass. Victoria found herself trapped in the small cabin, the world she knew replaced by wood smoke, creaking floorboards, and the low hum of wind pressing against the walls. She told herself it was temporary, just a few days until the crews cleared the highway. Yet, every hour she spent there reminded her of how out of place she felt. The furniture was worn, the stove old, the floors far from polished. She thought of the hotels she normally stayed in, suites where everything was arranged perfectly, and silence was a matter of insulation, not isolation. Here the silence was real, broken only by the sound of Chloe humming as she drew at the table or the steady rhythm of Ethan's boots on the porch. At first, Victoria kept her distance, thanking them curtly when food was placed in front of her, offering only short answers when Chloe tried to draw her into conversation. But Chloe was not a child who gave up easily. She asked about the city, about what Victoria's office looked like, about the tallest building she had ever seen. When Victoria responded with careful politeness, Chloe lit up, pressing for more, showing her own drawings in return. Sketches of mountains and animals filled notebook pages, colored in with crayons that had seen better days. There was pride in Chloe's voice as she explained each picture, and Victoria found herself listening despite herself, nodding, even smiling. Meals became less formal as the days passed. The three of them sat together at the scarred wooden table, passing bowls of soup and bread. Victoria noticed the way Ethan let Chloe speak first, how he listened to every word as though it mattered deeply. She watched the small rituals of their evenings, Chloe curling up with her rabbit while Ethan cleaned the dishes, the two of them moving with a rhythm built over years of just being together. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Victoria felt the warmth of family life pressing at the edges of her guarded heart. At night, when she lay on the couch with her leg propped up, she could hear Ethan in the workshop, the steady scrape of tools, the low thud of wood, the hum of focus carried through the walls. He was a man who did not waste time, who kept things working with his own hands. It was a kind of strength she was not used to, so different from the world of contracts and board meetings she had mastered. One evening, when he brought her another blanket and adjusted the splint on her leg, his sleeve slipped back. The firelight caught the jagged scar running down his forearm. She froze, eyes drawn to it, memory stirring. He noticed her glance and pulled the fabric down without a word. The silence that followed held weight, her curiosity deepening, the mystery of who this man really was refusing to let go. The storm outside still trapped them, but something inside the cabin was shifting, breaking down walls neither of them had expected. The cabin was quiet that night, the storm finally fading to a steady drizzle against the windows. Victoria woke on the couch, her leg aching but her senses sharp in the hush. The fire had burned low, throwing soft amber light across the room. She shifted slightly, and that was when her eyes fell on Ethan. He sat in the old armchair, head bowed, as if sleep had claimed him mid-watch. His sleeve had slipped back, and the scar along his arm was bare in the glow of the fire. Long, jagged, unmistakable. Her breath caught. For years that scar had haunted her memory, the only piece of a man who had vanished into the crowd. Her voice was a whisper, barely audible above the crackle of the fire. She said she had been searching for that scar for 8 years. Ethan stirred, frowning, not yet understanding. Then she spoke the words that broke the silence open. That scar belonged to the man who had pulled her daughter out of the river in Seattle. The night the bus went off the bridge, the memory crashed over Ethan like cold water. Seattle. The rain pouring down. The bus tipped half submerged. Children's cries muffled by the roar of the river. He remembered the crowd frozen on the bank, no one moving, and the way his body had reacted before his mind. Diving into the black water, hands clawing through the current until he found her. The little girl in the purple jacket. Her small arms limp as he dragged her to the surface, lungs burning, heart hammering. He had placed her in the arms of paramedics, not even knowing her name. And then the phone call. His wife's name, flashing across the screen. The car accident. A drunk driver who did not survive but took everything from Ethan in one moment. His wife. Their unborn son. While he was saving someone else's child. His own family was gone. That was the day his life split in two. The rescuer the world could have praised died with them, leaving only the mechanic in a mountain town, hiding from what he could not carry. Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she explained what came after. Her daughter Emily had survived that night. She was 12 now, bright, healthy, alive because of him. For years, Victoria had searched, hiring investigators, following every rumor, holding on to the memory of a scar. She said she had to find him, to tell him thank you, to show him that what he did mattered. Ethan shook his head, jaw tight, voice rough. He said he did not deserve thanks, that while her daughter lived, his family died. To him, it was no act of heroism. It was the cruelest trade life could offer. She reached for his hand, desperate, saying he gave her child a future. He pulled away, insisting she did not understand. Saving Emily had cost him everything. The air in the cabin grew heavy with the weight of their words. Victoria leaned forward, tears streaking her face, whispering that she owed him everything, that he could not erase what he had done no matter how much he tried to bury it. Ethan's shoulders tensed, his eyes dark with pain. He told her that every time he looked at that scar, he remembered not the girl he saved, but the wife and son he lost. In the hallway, Chloe stirred. She had woken to the sound of their voices, standing quietly just beyond the firelight. She did not understand everything, but she caught enough. The river. The accident. Her mother she barely remembered. The truth her father had never spoken. Her small face was pale as she pieced it together. When the words finally ran out, silence fell, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire and the faint patter of rain. Ethan sat rigid in his chair, Victoria bent with emotion on the couch, Chloe listening unseen. 3 lives bound now by a single night 8 years ago, a night that refused to stay buried. None of them spoke, but all 3 understood that nothing would be the same after this. Their pasts had collided, and their futures, whether they wanted it or not, were now entwined. Victoria could not let it rest. After the scar and the memories spilled into the firelit room, she pressed on, saying she needed to honor what Ethan had done. She spoke of setting up an education fund for Chloe, of ensuring her future was secure. Ethan's jaw clenched as he cut her off. He said he did not want her money, did not want to be turned into a story or a symbol. His voice rose, rough with grief, telling her that recognition could not bring back his wife or the son he never met. Pride and sorrow collided in him, a storm as fierce as the one outside. The room was tense until Chloe, sitting quietly with her rabbit clutched to her chest, spoke in a small but steady voice. She told her father that maybe complicated things did not always have to be bad, that sometimes letting people in was not weakness. The words cut through him sharper than any argument could. He looked at her, saw Melissa's eyes staring back at him, and his resistance broke. After a long silence, he said he would go. He would meet the girl he once pulled from the river. The trip to San Francisco was surreal. The noise of the airport, the rush of the city, the weight of memory pressed against Ethan with every step. He carried Chloe's hand like an anchor as they approached baggage claim. There, waiting with Victoria, stood Emily, She was 12 now, dark-haired and serious-eyed, dressed in jeans and a shirt with a science logo. She looked at him with an intensity that made his breath hitch. Then she stepped forward and threw her arms around his waist, holding him with a strength beyond her years. She thanked him, her words muffled against his chest. She told him he had given her life, that she knew about the cost, and that she promised she had not wasted the gift. She said she was making it count. The dam inside Ethan cracked. For the first time in years, he let himself cry, his arms tightening around the girl he had saved, tears falling for the family he had lost and the life he had helped preserve. It was not justice in a courtroom. It was justice of the heart, his sacrifice, his pain. His scar finally carried meaning because the one person who mattered had placed it there. The past could not be undone, but something had been set right at last. Ethan's shoulders shook as he held her, the weight lifting just enough for him to breathe again. Snow blanketed the valley by the time Christmas arrived, turning Pine Ridge into a postcard scene. The cabin glowed with strings of lights Ethan and Chloe had hung along the porch, their reflections sparkling in the frosted windows. Inside, the fire burned bright, filling the room with warmth that reached every corner. Victoria and Emily had made the long trip from San Francisco, and now the small cabin felt fuller than it ever had before. The girls laughed as they balanced on stools, hanging ornaments on the pine tree they had dragged in from the woods. Their voices mingled with the crackle of the fire, filling the space with life. Chloe handed Emily a folded piece of paper, shy but proud. Inside was a drawing of the four of them, standing in front of the cabin, labeled in careful handwriting with the word, "Home." Emily hugged her tightly, promising she would keep it forever. Victoria's eyes glistened as she watched, one hand resting on the back of the couch, her expression softening in a way she rarely allowed in her world of sharp edges and high ceilings. Later, Ethan surprised them with a box he had hidden under the tree. Inside were scarves he had knitted himself, each one uneven but made with patient effort. Chloe squealed with delight, wrapping hers around her neck immediately. Emily beamed as she draped hers across her shoulders. Victoria held hers close, her fingers lingering on the stitches, her voice catching as she said it was everything she had not known she needed. Ethan's cheeks reddened, but there was a quiet pride in his eyes. The night carried on with cinnamon rolls baking in the oven, and the girls sprawled on the rug, telling stories and sharing secrets like sisters who had known each other for years. The room felt alive, not with luxury or grandeur, but with something far more lasting, a sense of belonging, a sense of family. Later, when the cabin had quieted and the girls had fallen asleep under blankets by the fire, Ethan stepped outside. The stars stretched endlessly over the snow-covered peaks, the night clear and still. He breathed in the cold air, feeling something settle inside him. For so long, he had only survived, carrying grief like armor. But now, watching his daughter laugh, feeling the warmth of people who had come to him not out of duty, but out of choice, he realized he was beginning to live again. Maybe tomorrow could be better than yesterday. The thought stayed with him as Victoria stepped out beside him, scarf wrapped around her neck, her smile gentle in the starlight. Together they stood in silence, two lives once broken, now piecing together something new. Hope lingered in the cold air, fragile but real, promising that this was only the beginning of a brighter future.